I always knew Kyle was trouble the moment he walked into the office with that smug, cocky grin. He was only 28, fresh out of some overpriced MBA program, and suddenly he was my boss. Never mind that I've been managing projects longer than he's been legally allowed to drink. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I really did. Maybe he was just trying to assert himself, you know? Show everyone he wasn't just daddy's little boy. But it was hard to ignore how he kept dismissing my suggestions in meetings, interrupting me, and then repeating my exact words 5 minutes later as if they were his brilliant idea. The first real blow came 2 months ago when the Henderson project was up for grabs. It was a $13 million contract, a huge deal. I'd been working on the proposal for weeks, burning the midnight oil, missing dinners with my husband, and losing sleep over every detail. The numbers, the pitch, the strategy. It was my baby. But when it came time to present, Kyle announced that he was handing the project to his buddy, Trevor. Trevor. God, where do I even begin? He's Kyle's old frat brother, the type of guy who still brags about his beer pong records and wears loafers without socks. Trevor's got zero experience in project management, but he knows how to schmooze and kiss ass, so naturally, he's the golden boy now. I sat there in that conference room, watching Trevor fumble through my slides, stumbling over numbers he didn't understand, and making promises he couldn't possibly keep. And Kyle just sat there, nodding along, acting like this was all part of some grand plan. I felt sick. But what could I do? Object in front of everyone and look like the bitter, jealous old lady? Or sit there, smile politely, and watch Trevor steal everything I worked so hard for? A week after that disastrous presentation, I found myself sitting in my car, staring blankly at the steering wheel, my hands gripping it so tightly that my knuckles were turning white. How did I let this happen? How did I let Trevor steal my work right in front of me without saying a damn word? I could still hear Kyle's smug, condescending voice echoing in my head. You'll get another opportunity, Laura. But Trevor's young, and he needs a chance to shine. Shine? Are you kidding me? He couldn't even pronounce feasibility study, let alone understand one. But I didn't say that. I just smiled and nodded, swallowing my frustration like a bitter pill. Because that's what we do, right? We don't make waves. We keep our heads down, do our jobs, and hope someone notices. But no one noticed. The worst part was the way everyone in the office started treating me afterward. I could feel it, the subtle shift, the pitying looks, the hushed whispers. Like they all knew I was being shoved aside to make room for Kyle's little frat boy buddy. Even my assistant, Jamie, who used to ask for my advice on everything, started going straight to Trevor. He said Kyle wants it done this way, Jamie muttered when I asked why she hadn't brought the quarterly reports to me first. Kyle wants it done this way. That became the refrain around the office. I'd walk into a meeting, and Kyle would already be there with Trevor, laughing, joking, leaning in close like they were best friends. And I'd sit there, invisible, while they talked about my project as if I didn't exist. Then, last Friday, I caught wind of something that made my stomach drop. One of the junior accountants, Mark, was in the break room, on the phone. He didn't see me standing there by the coffee machine, but I heard every word. Yeah, man, Trevor completely botched the supply chain estimates. They're off by, like, 2 million. Yeah, 2 million. 2 million. $2 million. I nearly dropped my coffee. If Trevor messed up the numbers that badly, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And if the Henderson project falls apart, guess who's going to get blamed? Me, the project manager, the one who was supposed to oversee everything. But here's the thing. I didn't even have access to those files anymore. Kyle had locked me out of the project drive last week. Streamlining the process, he said. Too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many cooks? I was the one who built the damn kitchen. I should say something. I should march into Kyle's office, demand he hand the project back to me, and tell him that his buddy is about to cost the company millions. But then what? Kyle would just spin it like I was trying to sabotage Trevor. Or worse, like I was bitter and couldn't handle the fact that I'd been sidelined. So, I did nothing. I sat in my car, staring at my hands, feeling the world spin out of control, feeling like a fool for letting it get this far. By Monday morning, the tension in the office was so thick you could slice it with a knife. I could feel it the second I walked in. The frantic whispers, the darting eyes, the way people suddenly stopped talking when I passed by. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. Jamie was at her desk, eyes glued to her screen, her fingers flying over the keyboard. When she saw me, she quickly minimized the window. Too quickly. I leaned over. "Everything okay?" "Oh, yeah," she said, too brightly. "Just trying to get the new reports in on time. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. Not anymore. I felt like I was stumbling around in the dark while everyone else was in on some big secret, and I was getting sick of it. I made my way to the break room, hoping for a moment to gather my thoughts. That's when I heard them. Kyle and Trevor, huddled together in the corner, voices low, but not low enough. "I told you to fix it, Trevor," Kyle hissed. "I tried, man, but it's not that simple. The numbers are already in. The clients have seen them." Trevor's voice was panicked, his usual cocky demeanor gone. "If we go back now and say it was a mistake, they'll think we're incompetent." "They're going to think you're incompetent," Kyle snapped. "Not me." My stomach twisted. They were talking about the supply chain estimates, the $2 million error, the error that Trevor was supposed to fix but clearly hadn't. And now they were scrambling, trying to cover their tracks. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. If this deal goes under, it won't just be Trevor's head on the chopping block. It'll be mine. I'm the project manager on paper, even if Kyle shoved me to the sidelines. But what am I supposed to do? March into Kyle's office and demand he let me fix the mess he and his buddy created? As if he'd even listen. He'd just tell me to stay in my lane, smile that smug smile, and spin it so it looked like I was trying to sabotage Trevor. Again. When I finally pulled myself away from the break room and made it back to my desk, my inbox was flooded with emails. Most of them were marked urgent. All of them were from people asking about the Henderson project. "Can you confirm the supply chain costs? Have the estimates been revised? What's the current delivery schedule?" I sat there, staring at my screen, feeling the walls close in. If I respond, I'll have to admit that I haven't seen the updated numbers. If I don't respond, it'll look like I'm neglecting my job. And all the while, Kyle and Trevor are playing damage control behind closed doors. I took a deep breath and typed out a single email. "Kyle, can we discuss the Henderson project? There seem to be some discrepancies in the supply chain estimates, and I'd like to go over them before things get further off track." I hit send. My fingers were shaking. This was it. Either Kyle would step up and let me do my job, or he'd bury me further under Trevor's mistakes. Either way, something had to give. I spent the rest of the afternoon waiting for a response that never came. My eyes kept flicking to the corner of my screen, checking for that little notification. A new email from Kyle, a sign that he was at least willing to hear me out. But nothing. By 5 o'clock, I'd had enough. I grabbed my purse and headed for Kyle's office. His door was closed, and I could hear voices inside. I leaned closer, just for a second, and caught snippets of their conversation. "Just tell them it was a miscommunication," Kyle was saying, his voice tight, frantic. "What if they ask for the original numbers?" Trevor sounded like a kid who'd been caught stealing candy. "They're going to notice. I mean, $2 million doesn't just disappear." My stomach lurched. He was right. They would notice. And when they did, who were Kyle and Trevor going to throw under the bus? Me. The project manager who was supposed to oversee everything. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and knocked. The room went silent. Then the door swung open, and there was Kyle, all false smiles and two bright eyes. "Laura, what can I do for you?" "I sent you an email," I said, keeping my voice even, "about the Henderson project. I'd like to go over the supply chain numbers." Trevor's face went pale. Kyle's eyes narrowed, just for a fraction of a second before he said, "Oh, right. I was just about to get to that. We're handling it. Don't worry." "I am worried," I said, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "There's a $2 million discrepancy in the estimates. I need to see the numbers." Kyle's jaw clenched. I said we're handling it. He started to close the door, but I stuck my foot in the gap, my heart pounding. "Kyle, I'm the project manager. If there's a problem, it's my responsibility to—" I said, Kyle snapped, his voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. We're handling it. And then he slammed the door in my face. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. I wanted to kick it down, scream, march straight to HR and tell them everything, but I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked back to my desk, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. By the time I got home, my husband Mike was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in and frowned. Rough day? You have no idea, I muttered, dropping my purse onto a chair and sinking down across from him. What happened? I opened my mouth to tell him everything. About Kyle, about Trevor, about the $2 million mistake that was going to blow up in all our faces. But the words got stuck in my throat. What could I say? That I was letting these two idiots walk all over me? That I'd let my career, my reputation, my life get hijacked by the boss's entitled son and his incompetent buddy? Nothing, I said finally, forcing a smile. Just a long day. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the $2 million error. This was about something bigger, about how easily Kyle had dismissed me, how quickly he'd shut me down, as if I were nothing. And that's when it hit me. If they were willing to lie about the numbers, what else were they willing to lie about? The next morning, I walked into the office and felt it instantly. That suffocating tension, like everyone was holding their breath. People were clustered in small groups, whispering, eyes darting toward Kyle's office. The blinds were closed, but I could hear his voice through the thin walls, sharp and angry. I dropped my bag at my desk and started up my computer, half expecting another flood of emails about the Henderson project. But there was nothing. No updates, no new numbers, nothing but radio silence. Jamie walked by, clutching a stack of files so tightly her knuckles were white. I reached out, touching her arm lightly. Jamie, what's going on? She glanced around like she was afraid someone might hear, then leaned in close. Trevor's in Kyle's office, she whispered. They've been in there for almost an hour. About what? I don't know, Jamie said, her eyes wide and anxious. But I heard Trevor say something about the numbers not adding up again. He said he needed more time to fix it. I felt my stomach drop. Again? How could the numbers not add up again? The $2 million discrepancy was already bad enough. What else could possibly be wrong? But before I could press Jamie for more, Kyle's door swung open and Trevor stumbled out. His face was flushed, eyes red, and his jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Everything okay? I asked, stepping in front of him. Fine, he snapped, not meeting my eyes. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. I knew that. And judging by the way Trevor looked, he knew it too. I watched as he stalked off toward the break room, his shoulders hunched, fists clenched, and without thinking, I followed him. When I walked in, Trevor was standing by the window, his back to me, staring blankly at the parking lot below. His hands were shaking. Trevor, I said, closing the door behind me. What's going on? Nothing, he muttered, his voice hoarse. Just nothing. You're lying, I said, stepping closer. I heard you and Kyle. You said the numbers didn't add up. Again. What did you mean? He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, but still didn't turn around. It's under control. Like hell it is, I said, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. Look, Trevor, you don't have to do this. Whatever Kyle's telling you to do, you don't have to. He's not telling me to do anything, Trevor snapped, finally spinning around. His eyes were wild, desperate. I did it, okay? Me. I screwed up, and now I have to fix it. My heart was pounding. What did you do? Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it again, his jaw working furiously. For a moment, I thought he was going to crack, spill everything. But then he shook his head and brushed past me, storming out of the room without another word. I stood there, staring at the empty space where he'd been standing, my pulse racing. Whatever Trevor did, it was bad. Worse than I thought. And Kyle was clearly in on it, covering for him. I had two choices. Keep my mouth shut and let them sink the company with their lies, or go to HR and risk losing my job, maybe even my career. But as I walked back to my desk, I noticed something new in my inbox. A single email sent anonymously. The subject line read, "You need to know the truth." My hands shook as I clicked it open. Inside was a single line of text. "Check the Henderson Project invoice files and look at the dates." I stared at the email, my eyes burning from staring too long, my mind racing. Who sent this? And why? There was no name, no signature, no clue to its origin. Just that single, cryptic line. "Check the Henderson Project invoice files and look at the dates." I glanced around the office, half expecting to see someone watching me, someone waiting to see what I'd do. But everyone was glued to their screens, pretending to work while sneaking glances at Kyle's closed office door. Whatever was going down in there, it was bad. I took a deep breath, closed the email, and opened the project drive. Kyle had revoked my access to most of the Henderson files, but there were still a few folders I could get into. I started digging, clicking through invoices, estimates, and financial reports. At first, everything seemed normal. The dates aligned, the numbers matched, until I opened the most recent invoice. That's when my heart dropped. The invoice was for $250,000, labeled as a prepayment to supplier. The date was 3 days ago, but the project schedule clearly stated that we weren't scheduled to pay the supplier for another 2 months. And worse, the account number listed for the transfer didn't match any of our usual suppliers. My stomach twisted. Was this the mistake Trevor had been talking about? Or was it something else? Before I could dig further, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jamie. "Trevor just left. He looked like he was going to throw up." I grabbed my purse and headed for the parking lot. I found Trevor leaning against his car, his hands gripping the roof so hard his knuckles were white. "Trevor," I said, stepping closer. "What's going on? I saw the invoice. Why was $250,000 paid out early?" His eyes darted around, wild and unfocused. It wasn't supposed to. Kyle said he'd handle it." "Handle what?" Trevor swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "The supplier payment. He said he'd take care of it. But then he told me to sign off on it, and I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "That the account number was his," Trevor whispered, his eyes glistening. "Kyle's account. He transferred the money to himself, and he made it look like a supplier payment." My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear him. "Are you saying Kyle embezzled $250,000 from the project budget?" Trevor nodded, his whole body trembling. "He said it was just a loan, that he'd put it back before the auditors caught on. But now they're asking questions, and I don't know what to do." A sickening realization washed over me. This wasn't about a $2 million supply chain error. That was just a distraction. The real issue was the money Kyle had siphoned off, and the fact that he'd used Trevor to do it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because if this blows up," Trevor said, his eyes wide and terrified, "Kyle's going to say it was all me. He already told me he'd deny everything, and I don't have proof. All I have is my word against his." I swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a stone. I could go to HR with this. I could blow the whistle and let the chips fall where they may. But without hard evidence, it was Trevor's word against Kyle's, and Kyle was the boss's son. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to meet Trevor's eyes. "Then we need to get that proof." I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with everything Trevor had told me. Kyle had stolen $250,000. Not just stolen, he'd funneled it straight into his own account and made it look like Trevor's mistake. And now, Trevor was falling apart, Kyle was tightening the noose, and I was caught in the middle. If I did nothing, Trevor would take the fall. But if I tried to expose Kyle without solid proof, he'd bury me along with Trevor. I had to be smart, careful, methodical. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The building was quiet, the overhead lights still flickering to life. I slipped into the IT department, where Mark, the junior accountant, was hunched over his keyboard, a pair of oversized headphones clamped over his ears. "Hey, Mark," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Got a minute?" He pulled off the headphones and smiled, looking a little too eager. Sure, what's up? I need a favor, I said, lowering my voice. You remember that supplier invoice for the Henderson project? The $250,000 one? Can you pull up the original transaction log for me? Mark's brow furrowed. Why? Is something wrong? I hesitated. How much could I say? I just need to verify a few things. It's important. Mark nodded, clicking away at his keyboard. Give me a second. I watched as he typed, my heart pounding in my chest. If Kyle found out what I was doing, he'd have me escorted out of the building. But if I could get the original transaction log, I'd have proof that the account number belonged to Kyle, not the supplier. There it is, Mark said, pointing to the screen. Transaction ID 1347. Supplier prepayment of $250,000. Transferred to account number 2893462. I felt a jolt of adrenaline. That was it. The account number. The one Trevor said was Kyle's. Can you print that for me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously. I'm not supposed to print financial records without authorization. Kyle said we're on lockdown after the Henderson thing. Of course he did. Of course Kyle was already covering his tracks. Just this once, I said, leaning in. Please, Mark, you'd be helping me out a lot. Mark bit his lip, glanced around again, then sighed. Fine, but you owe me. Within seconds, the printer behind him whirred to life, spitting out the transaction log. I snatched the paper and shoved it into my bag, my hands shaking. Thanks, Mark, I said, forcing a smile. I owe you big time. I made it back to my desk and shoved the printout deep into my bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old project reports. My heart was still hammering in my chest. I had the account number, but I still needed more. Something irrefutable that tied it to Kyle. Then, as I was about to close the drawer, I noticed something. A small white envelope slipped between two files. My name was scrawled across the front in shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Inside was a single slip of paper with a typed message. You're getting close. Be careful. A friend. I dropped the paper as if it were on fire. A friend? Or a threat? Someone knew what I was doing. And they were watching. The note weighed on me like a stone. Who was watching me? And how much did they know? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trailing my every step. Every time I looked over my shoulder, every time I heard a phone ring or a door close, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. Was it Kyle? Was it Jamie? Or was it someone I hadn't even considered? I couldn't risk keeping the transaction log at the office anymore. Too many eyes, too many whispers. That night, I stuffed it in my purse and drove home with my heart pounding against my ribcage. Mike was in the living room when I walked in, watching the news. Hey, hun, he said, glancing up. You okay? You look like a woman unraveling, like someone whose whole life was hanging by a thread. Just tired, I said, forcing a smile. Long day. In the bedroom, I locked the door, pulled the transaction log out of my bag, and spread it out on the bed. I took a photo of it with my phone and then shoved it into the bottom of my sock drawer, under a pile of old sweaters. If Kyle was willing to set up Trevor, he wouldn't hesitate to do the same to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone, staring at the blurry photo of the transaction log. The account number, 2893462. I couldn't prove it was Kyle's, not yet, but maybe someone else could. My finger hovered over the contact list. I scrolled down to Mark. He worked in accounting. He'd have access to payroll records, direct deposits, anything that could link that account number to Kyle. But could I trust him? If Kyle found out what I was doing, he could turn Mark against me. Or worse, he could have already done it. Before I could second-guess myself, I texted Mark. Hey, can you meet me at the grill after work tomorrow? Need to talk about something important. Seconds later, a response. Sure, everything okay? Just meet me, I typed back, my hands shaking. Please. The next day felt like walking through quicksand. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every look Jamie threw my way felt loaded with suspicion. Was she in on it? Was she the one who left the note? When 5 o'clock finally rolled around, I grabbed my purse and headed out without a word. The grill was a few blocks away, a dark, noisy dive bar where no one from the office ever went. Mark was already there, nursing a beer, his knee bouncing nervously. He looked up when he saw me, his face pale. "Hey, Laura." I slid into the booth across from him, leaning in close. "Mark, I need a favor, and it has to stay between us." His eyes darted around, and he swallowed hard. "This is about the Henderson project, isn't it?" I froze. "How did you know?" Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "Because I've been getting the same anonymous emails you have." A chill ran down my spine. "You have?" He nodded, pulling out his phone and scrolling through his messages. "They started about 2 weeks ago. First, it was just stuff about Trevor messing up the numbers. Then it was about the supplier payments. And yesterday, they sent me this." He handed me the phone. The email was from the same anonymous sender, and it was only one line. "She's getting too close. Make sure she stays quiet." My blood ran cold. Whoever was watching me wasn't just leaving me notes. They were sending Mark instructions. And if they knew I was talking to him now, what would they do to both of us? I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. The note, the emails to Mark, the $250,000 transaction log buried in my sock drawer. It was all piling up, and the more I uncovered, the more I felt like I was being watched. But by who? I sat across from Mark in that dim, noisy bar, my mind whirling. "So you've been getting these emails for 2 weeks?" Mark nodded, eyes darting nervously toward the door. "Yeah. At first I thought it was just some office gossip. You know how people talk." "But it's not just gossip," I said, leaning forward. "It's someone who knows exactly what Kyle is doing. Someone who's watching us." Mark swallowed hard. "I don't want to get involved, Laura. You don't understand. I have a kid, a mortgage. If Kyle finds out I've been talking to you, he'll what?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Frame you? Throw you under the bus? Because that's exactly what he's planning to do to Trevor." Mark's face fell. "You really think he'd do that?" I nodded. "He already has. Trevor signed off on that payment. He's the one holding the smoking gun." Mark's leg bounced under the table. "What do you want from me?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to ask. "I need you to help me link that account number to Kyle. You work in accounting. You have access to payroll records, direct deposits, everything." Mark's face blanched. "You're asking me to break into the company's financial records? Are you out of your mind? If we don't do this, Trevor goes down, and after him, it'll be me, and maybe even you," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Think about it, Mark. If Kyle finds out you know too much, what do you think he'll do to you?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. For a moment, I thought he was going to bolt, but then he closed his eyes and nodded. "Okay, but this is the last time. After this, I'm out." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you, Mark." We left the bar separately, and I spent the entire drive home checking my rearview mirror, convinced that someone was following me. But the streets were empty, and when I pulled into my driveway, the only light on was the one in the living room where Mike sat, flipping through channels. "You're late," he said, not looking up. "Yeah, stayed late at work," I said, forcing a smile. "You know how it is." Mike nodded, eyes still fixed on the TV. But I could feel his suspicion, the unspoken tension stretching between us like a taut rope. I couldn't tell him what was really happening. Not yet. Not until I had something solid. I headed to the bedroom and checked the sock drawer, my heart pounding. The transaction log was still there, untouched. But when I opened my email, I found another message from the anonymous sender. "You're running out of time. Kyle knows what you're doing." I dropped the phone, my skin prickling with cold sweat. Was it a bluff? Or did Kyle really know? And if he did, what was he planning to do next? The next morning, I walked into the office feeling like I was walking into a minefield. Every face looked like a potential enemy. Every glance felt loaded with accusation. Mark was already at his desk, hunched over his computer, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. When I sat down at my own desk, he didn't look up. But a minute later, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Meet me in the archive room in 10 minutes. Got something. My heart pounded as I stood, trying to act casual, like I was just going to grab a coffee. The archive room was at the back of the building, far from Kyle's office. When I pushed the door open, Mark was pacing, a stack of papers clutched in his shaking hands. I got it, he said, thrusting the pages at me. The account number, it's on Kyle's direct deposit file. It's his. I flipped through the papers, my breath catching. There it was, the same account number, 2893462, listed as Kyle's personal account. Proof. Oh my God, I whispered. This is it. But before I could say anything else, the door swung open, and Kyle stepped in, his expression hard as stone. Well, well, he said, closing the door behind him. Looks like you two have been busy. Mark went white, the blood draining from his face. Kyle, we were just... Save it, Kyle snapped, his eyes locking onto me. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? You, skulking around, dragging Mark into this? What did you think you were going to do? Expose me? My mouth went dry. I forced myself to meet his gaze. You stole that money, Kyle. You funneled it into your own account and tried to frame Trevor. Kyle smiled, a slow, chilling grin. You don't have proof. I held up the papers, my hand trembling. I do now. Kyle's jaw clenched, and for a split second I saw something flicker in his eyes. Panic, desperation. Then, in one swift motion, he lunged forward, grabbing the papers from my hand and ripping them in half. You think this is going to stop me? He said, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and foul. You think you're smarter than me, Laura? You're nothing. You've always been nothing. My whole body shook with rage and fear. I already took pictures of those documents, Kyle, and I sent them to HR. Kyle's face fell. You're bluffing. Am I? I said, stepping back. I sent them an email this morning, all the evidence, the transaction log, the account number, everything. Kyle's face twisted, his fists clenched. But before he could say another word, the door burst open. 2 men in security uniforms stepped in, followed by Mr. Henderson himself, his face dark with fury. Kyle, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cold and calm. We need to talk. Kyle's face crumpled. Dad, it's not what it looks like. But Mr. Henderson shook his head. I just spoke to HR. They got the email, and I got the call from the supplier, the real supplier, this morning. You're done. Kyle's shoulders slumped, his face ashen. The security guards grabbed his arms, dragging him from the room. He shot me a look as they hauled him away, a look filled with venom and rage. You'll pay for this, Laura, he hissed. You haven't seen the last of me. When the door slammed shut behind them, the room fell silent. Mark slumped against the wall, his face buried in his hands. I stood there, feeling the adrenaline drain from my body. It was over. Kyle was caught. But the fear still lingered, Kyle's final words echoing in my mind. You haven't seen the last of me.